It's surprising how things come back to your mind after all these years, but every so often it springs into your head how the Second World War, really affected things in different ways. As being a child, around about 12, 13, and we were living on the other side of the city, on the road that went to the airport into the city of Enschede. And all of a sudden we just heard a massive rumble. And we went outside, stood in the street, and all these massive German trucks and troops came rumbling past our house. And they had taken over the airport, and they had taken over the town, and that's the first time we knew we had been invaded. But being a young kid, I didn't know what it meant. I happened to watch through the window and I saw 6 tanks driving through an area of about so many metres, driving through and just taking over the area that we were living in. We never knew anything what happened because the radios were totally banned. There was no such thing as a radio. You weren't listening to, nothing was published or anything printed against the... Yeah, they moved into the town, truckloads and truckloads of troops, soldiers sitting in the back of trucks with their guns, travelling into the city. That's the first time I knew that somebody moved in on us, but not knowing really what it meant. They're sitting in a hole across the road, in a manhole you could say, and watching Spitfires and German Messerschmitts fighting up above, and seeing the pilots jump out before the plane gets down, and then the German troops would lay on the ground on their backs with a machine gun and shooting in the bloke's legs. So by the time he got there was not much left of him, and these are the sort of things that went on. When they started dropping the bombs every night, it just didn't stop. And every probably second or third night, the sirens would go off. And what they mainly used was the fire cluster bombs, which is a little long stick about that long, and when it hits the ground it just bursts into flames. It's not an explosion. And my mother's sister and husband had 3 of them dropped in the ceiling of their house, and it burnt. It instantly it hits, and all it does is just burn and burns whatever you're in. But they managed to whole of the cluster and threw it out of the window or whatever it was. But these are the sort of things that was the worst thing. Is the bombs, all right, killed and damaged people, but the bombs of anti-phosphate, there was a name for it. They would drop, it's like a big long aluminium stick that was dropped by the bucket load. The whole sky would light up with these cluster bombs and just hit the houses, and just as they burst into flames, and that's all they did was burn the place. Having a time bomb dropped on our house in 1944 at the 3rd of March 1944 at 3 o'clock in the morning, and 11 of our neighbours died. We raced outside. We thought the bomb had exploded, but it hadn't. It sort of dropped. We fell out of bed. We came downstairs, and my dad heard the neighbour next door yelling and screaming, "Help, help, help." And Dad raced over, and the bomb had dropped through the roof, through the second floor, through the ground floor, into the house below, and the man had dropped into the hole. Our neighbour had dropped into the hole. And funny enough, the first thing the man asked for, "Can I have a cigarette?" Sort of never forgotten that. Anyhow, Dad pulled him out, and we decided to go to a shelter that we had built out of bales of hay with a pile of dirt round it, so we thought everything was over and finished with. Went to the shelter, and then after the shelter we thought there's no more planes flying over, no more no more nothing. So everybody went back to their house, and the neighbours next door said, "Oh, come in for coffee." They had a husband and wife and a daughter, and all of us, the 5 of us, went into next door for coffee that night. Probably be 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was. And all of a sudden the bomb exploded. And all we could see was a concrete wall coming towards us and leaving us 6 feet, probably about 2 metres, even less, for 8 of us to get out of this crashed wall. And I can remember my young brother being buried under the rubble and the beam, and I pulled the beam off his head and pulled him out from under it, and we went outside, and I think I was the first one to go outside, and when I walked outside all I could see was no house.
Your house?
Yeah, all gone. And the house next door, and the house next door. But all these people that were in the shelter that night had gone back to their house, and the bomb explosion, lucky enough, went to the left instead of the right. If it had gone to the right, I wouldn't be here today. They went to the left, and 11 of our neighbours got killed that night. We always stayed home because it was too... air raids could start at any time of the day or night. And it just went on and on, it just never stopped. Well, being a kid, you went to bed early, and if the siren went off, you made to get up and righto, get your dressing gown on or whatever, and go into the 8 to 10 homes. We were living at the back of a farm, and the farmer had given us a block of ground, probably enough to build a bomb shelter to hold about 20 to 30 people. So what we did, we built bales of straw, built the building out of that, wooden beams on top with whatever material we could find, and then it would be covered with dirt all the way over the top, over the straw bales. So if a bomb would hit, it would hit the dirt straw bales, and the effect would be okay, but that was the closest we had to it. But we used to stand outside at night and watch the planes fight in the sky, or watch all the bombers go over. If there was a moonlight, or the Germans had the spotlights, the searchlights on the planes at night, we just see, they spotted one, and next minute he'd be coming down somewhere. And sort of that was probably nearly every second or third night, that would be the normal procedure. You get to bed, you sleep for an hour and a half, and then you would finish up in the bomb shelter for the rest of the night, or as kids we would just sleep in the one corner, or go back to bed if the siren would go and say everything is clear. The particular plane that dropped the bomb on our house was a plane we found out later that was on fire, had gone to Germany and was on fire on the way home back to England or wherever it came from, and he decided to drop his load. And dropped his load. Now, the funny part of it is our house was in the middle of two gigantic paddocks. Paddock behind, paddock in the front. And the bomb hit the middle of the house. So it was most unusual. It could have hit the paddock or the paddock in front, but no, he hit the house. And apparently the plane was on fire on the way home. I remember my uncle standing the night of the bombing, my uncle coming out and yelling out to, "Where's my mother? Where are you, leader?" And he just lived up the road a few 100 metres. But funny enough, the whole family was safe and we're very lucky. We had no electricity. Dad had designed a water wheel that would fit into the kitchen sink, and as he turned the water on in the tap, it would turn the water wheel, and the water wheel would drive a push-bike generator. And the push-bike generator would light two lights in the ceiling, or push-bike lights in the ceiling in the lounge. And that was our normal light. Favourite meal? Well, there was no meat. Probably pancakes would be the most popular one, because there was some, you could get flour and pancakes, and Mother would throw anything into it that might make some sort of food. Dad would always get the meat. If we did have meat, we could probably get the bones if there was any bones left. But he would always get the bigger meal of the two. We grew our own veggies, so all the veggies were probably, that's what we got. I think rice might have been the most prominent one, but even that was hard to get. I can remember Dad in the war years managed to, I don't know how he did it, but he built a little box on the back of his push bike, and we didn't know what it was for. And he drove to this farmer, I don't know how many kilometres away, who he had repaired a wheat harvester. The engine had blown up and he had repaired it so the farmer could harvest his wheat. And instead of getting paid for it, he didn't want to get paid for it. He just wanted food. Food was the only thing that to survive on. So he talked this farmer into getting a piglet. The problem was he had to get this piglet home. And having people on the road constantly, like German people, they tried to, he put it in this little box that he had built on the back. Shoved the pig in, but the pig kept moaning and groaning, or squealing. He got stopped on the way home by German guards, and he pretended that it was a baby, and they let him off the hook, and he brought it home, and his pet lived in our coal shelter for quite a few months until it grew up and was brought into the house. A man came in who was a butcher, cut the pig's throat, and Mother caught all the blood and made it into black pudding. And that's how which was wheat and blood and whatever, and it was all cooked up. And to survive, food-wise, our yard was totally taken over by animals. We had chickens, we had roosters, they were breeding, they were laying eggs, and then our workshop, our garage, probably 3 metres by 3 metres, was totally taken over by rabbit cages. There would be rabbit cages 4 stories high, and there'd be 4 or 5 cages on one wall, another so much on that wall, and they were all breeding like mad. Kept on breeding rabbits and more rabbits and more rabbits. And as they grew up, that was our meat. And chickens, we would eat chickens. If they got too old or didn't lay eggs, that was the next one to go. But it was good, clean, fresh food. They were living on, as a boy, my every job after school every night at 4 o'clock, I had an old pram, and I would go around the streets or across the road or wherever I could find, and I would pick grass, clover, whatever I could find to feed 40 rabbits or whatever it is. And being a cheeky boy, I used to fluff up the grass, and it looked good. I had a whole pram full of grass, and I would come home and Dad would push it down. He said, "You only got a half a pram. Where's the rest? Go and get the rest." So I tried to get out of picking grass, and I would fluff up the grass to make it look like a full barrow. But no, Dad would always trick me and say, "Look, you've only got that bit going. We've got another 30 rabbits to feed, so I can get some more." Being a kid, an aeroplane flew over 2 days later and dropped a fuel tank. They used to carry fuel tanks under their wings, and when they were empty they would drop them, which was an aluminium type size of bomb. And I happened to cut the top out of the tank and use the bomb crater that was full of water by then to use a kayak. So, so the way things as a kid were different. Not very good. They weren't, because they were so indoctrinated with Gestapo, whatever. If they stepped out of line themselves, which the majority of them wanted, all they wanted was to go home. Soldiers, German soldiers, all they did was want to go home to their family. But it's because if they stepped out of line, they would be shot themselves. Some of them walked home for miles and miles, stripped off their clothing and just walked home. Father's brother, who lived in a town probably 20, 30 kilometres away, the Germans would come to a certain area and say, everybody in this street and the next street and the next street will report to the railway station tonight. If not, if they find that they are still at home, they will be shot. And they were taken away, put on the train and used in work camps in Germany. Uncle Sandy, my dad's brother, got on the train, and when he got close to the area where we lived, he jumped off the train, and somehow, I don't know how, but he managed to get to our house, and he lived under our floor in our house for months and months and months. But he survived. He stayed alive after the war and had a big family. We had a German airfield at the bottom of our city, which was used as a concentration camp, so most of the people were sent down there, but majority were never heard of again. That was just not the done thing. It just didn't get there. See, being young, being 12, 13, we didn't hear anything that side of the war. All we heard was this side. 3 doors up from us, somebody hit a Jewish person, a girl or a boy, I can't remember, was hidden again under the floor, under the house. She was living there because we had brick houses and a floor, and there was a large gap below, and they were mainly set up as a lot of space, but it could be comfortable for somebody that wanted to get out of the road. I think there were 2 kids, a boy and a girl. They were Jewish, and they were living there for some time until we heard that somebody had reported them and they were taken away. I went to choir practice one Sunday morning to the church that I belong to, and the sirens went off, and the priest said, "I think you better go home," but I had 3 or 4 kilometres to go home, and watching the dog fights above me, I raced home, and every time I heard machine guns or whatever planes were shooting at one another, I would hide behind a tree, and for 4 kilometres I walked home hiding behind trees, get to the next one, get to the next one, just to shelter from the bullets that the planes were, diving in all directions at one another, but they didn't care what they were shooting at. So that's probably the scariest time that I went through by myself. Usually you got family at home that say, come and do this, you move here, move there. But I sort of went home by myself at that particular time, and probably that was the scariest part. As the tanks came into the town, we still had Germans in almost like a suburb. We still had Germans in our area, and 2, I think they were school teachers. They had joined the underground and had an orange band on their arm, pretending that they were the Dutch underground, and the Germans caught them, and they were shot in front of us in a paddock across the road from where we were living. But even when the American and the British tanks came in 2 nights later, the Germans were still there, and Dad and I went down and saw the British tanks and pretended, and they gave us blocks of chocolate and all this sort of stuff. And the next minute, machine gun fire where we were towards the tanks. And Dad and I crawled through a gutter, quite a deep gutter, all the way home to try and save ourselves from the bullets that were shoring. The Americans, or I'm not sure if they were Americans or British, I think they were Americans, but the following day, a platoon of American soldiers rounded all the Germans up and stripped them half naked and made them run around a garden area probably about 2 acres, 3 acres size, and made them run until they virtually dropped. 2 days later, they dropped an enormous bomb on a road into Germany, not far from where we were living, and it left a great big hole in the road, and the Americans had to get across. So they drove a complete truck rolled it into the hole, full of brand new motorbikes, chockers, and he just drove a dozer over the top and filled it in with a truckload of. They used to have ordnances on motorbikes, taking messages backwards and forwards without putting it on radio. And they just filled this road in with this truck, chock-a-block full of brand new motorbikes. After the war, school went back to normal. I joined the choir and everything was back to normal. Dad got a garage and everything was back to normal. And Dad had been saying for some time that the Germans that he worked with, all they wanted to do was to go home, and they supplied us with food because all was to survive, and food was the main thing. So Dad got friendly with the German soldiers and they supplied us with vinegar bread, which was a German gigantic loaf of bread, very big, but it was soaked in vinegar. But it stayed fresh for weeks after weeks after weeks. But it was survival, so it didn't matter what it tasted like, it was food. But towards the end of the day, the war finished, the Dutch underground came in and arrested Dad's boss, his wife, his daughter and son, because they had proved that they had collaborated with the Germans. And the last thing I can remember, them being marched out to the original German concentration camp that they had taken over the Dutch airport, and they were marched to the airport. And he was a very high-standing man, and being degraded like they were. After the war, we moved into their house above the garage, and the Dutch Remy, the Dutch Army workshop, took over the workshop, and they asked us to live above the garage. And the funny part of it was they asked Dad to stay in charge of the Remy workshop, but he had to become a soldier. And he says, "A soldier? No, I don't want to be a soldier." Well, he said, "Well, what's the salary? What does it pay?" And so they gave him a list of what a private, a corporal, a sergeant major and a captain would be paid. And they said, "Well, you can't be an officer, but you can be an under officer." So the salary he took was a sergeant major. So he went out one morning in a civilian suit and came back as a sergeant major. A couple of hours later, because that's the salary he chose, that's what he wanted to live on. So he became a sergeant major within 2 hours, not ever marched or did anything like it. But all it was about a salary. But he ran the Remy workshop. And then because Germany had been, sort of, you could say, liberated, they gave him a truck and 2 other officers, and they used to go once a week. They would drive into Germany, and they would have the right, I don't know what gave them the right, but they had the right to get all the tools, all the machinery, all the bits and pieces they needed to set up a proper workshop again and repair trucks and whatever was needed to run the show again. And he brought back a brand new DKW 350cc motorbike for £2 a coffee, because the Germans were absolutely coffee mad. And it cost him £2 of coffee for a brand new DKW motorbike. Yes, 6 1/4. He was the German commander in Enschede when we were there. He had a limp, and he used to be in a German uniform limping. He might have been wounded in an earlier part of the war, I don't know, but he was our German commander, and his nickname was 6 1/4.
Why?
Because he was limping.
Right.
He wasn't all there.
Okay.
Surprised that he was still alive, still part of the world, or not even locked up for the things that went on that he did. You know, anybody that got picked up doing anything wrong, doesn't matter what it was, if there was a slight tendency of being against the Germans, there was no court case, there was no nothing, it was just, and that was the end of you. But we managed to survive the war. A lot of people didn't. Like 11 of our neighbours next door died. It's a long time trying to remember all the things that went on.